Hey Game Master, it's GM Jim from Wizards and Wordslingers here to blow your brains out with yet more tabletop advice. Today we're going to talk about running Theater of the Mind combat and why you should consider trying it. And most important, what considerations to keep in mind when running Theater of the Mind. See what I did there? First of all, I love gridded combat. I love getting out maps and minis and terrain. I love using those overlay area of effect spell thingies to measure out a fireball or a cone of cold. I love seeing the heroes and baddies in little plastic 3D. Combat in Roll20 or Foundry is also great. I love using tokens and virtual maps and VTTs, using their handy little drawing tools and rulers and all that kind of stuff. Crunchy gridded combat is fantastic, one of my favorite parts of the game. But I also love Theater of the Mind for very different reasons, mainly the speed of it. The primary reason to use Theater of the Mind is that it's just faster and easier to set up in almost every instance. You never have to source JPEGs of monsters or find a battle map with draw lines on it. You never have to dig through a box of plastic minis to find one more goblin. Even if you have a physical map and minis ready to go before the combat starts, you still have to spend time putting it on the table and setting it up. But with Theater of the Mind, you can transition from roleplay to rolling initiative in a matter of seconds. And players should love it because it's more narrative focused. If someone comes up with a cool idea, you just run with it. Let them use that tree branch to swing across the creek or use the chandelier to drop behind the enemies. Why not? Any move that helps paint a picture and create a cool story should be encouraged. But it's not all puppies and rainbows. There are some important things you need to focus on to make sure it's fun and not confusing for the players. Because you have to remember that everyone is using their imagination. And likely everyone is picturing their own version of the enemies, the positioning, and the battlefield. It's easy to get mixed up, especially if you have those types of players who are likely to drift off or are not hanging on every single word you as the GM say. So here are our 4 gotchas to remember. First, you need to be thorough when describing the scene. What room or outdoor location are you in? Where are the baddies? Where are the good guys standing or sitting in relation to them? Are there important environmental factors to figure in, like rafters that your rogue might want to crawl across to drop behind the enemies to rain dagger death from above? Are there flammable objects that your fireball-loving wizard might need to consider? You don't always have to know and note every single little thing beforehand, and leaving blank spots can lead to some fun improv moments later. If the monk asks, "Is there a chandelier I could swing from?" I'm likely to say, "I don't know, roll a d6. On a 4 to 6, then yes there is." But giving players as much information about the location beforehand will really help get their creative juices going when it's their turn. Second, learn how to ignore distances for the most part. When running Theater of the Mind, you are not going to nitpick movement speed and area of effect to an extent. Experienced grid players are probably going to ask you exactly how far away that orc is. I describe distances in terms of things like, you could get there with your movement. You could get there with a dash, or you can't get there on this turn, it would take you 2 turns. And here you need to make sure you're not forgetting players who have certain movement advantages, like monks, barbarians, rogues who can bonus action dash, players who took the mobile feat. Make sure to reward those abilities by giving them a little edge in this vague, quasi-distance spatial arrangement you're loosely keeping track of in your head. In general, your melee baddies are up close, and your ranged attack baddies are far away. Simple and easy. It's fine to say, the baddies are a little bit beyond your 1-round movement reach fighter, but the barbarian could get there on this turn. You might need to be looser with things like opportunity attacks. I consider PCs to be either melee engaged or not engaged, which should help the rogue with sneak attack decisions. If an enemy decides to flee, then everyone who is melee engaged with that enemy gets an opportunity attack. And if that enemy's path puts them through the party, then I'll decide on the fly who else gets an opportunity attack. Like I said, be loose with it and favor the PCs. About area of effect. Chapter 8 of the 2014 edition Dungeon Master's Guide has rules for how to adjudicate this in Theater of the Mind. There's a table named Targets in Areas of Effect, but I usually just like to eyeball it. If you've described the room as small, then that fireball is going to hit everybody. If the room is large, you can say that that fireball will get most or all of the baddies and spare the PCs. You can have the player roll something for it if you like, but don't spend a bunch of time in your head figuring out where everyone is, so you'll figure out exactly where that fireball is going to land. Theater of the Mind is supposed to be faster, remember? A general rule of thumb, if there are 4 baddies, I say the fireball will catch 3 of them. Unless a player comes up with a great plan like leaping on top of the dresser, grabbing the chandelier, and then casting the fireball spell. That's such a cool idea, I will definitely let them hit all the baddies that way. I suggest rewarding creative narrative ideas with extra mechanical results. Same with spells like Force Cage or Wall of Flame. Lean toward favoring the PCs and generally letting them do what they want. Or roll dice if you want it to be more random, like say if there are 6 baddies, have them roll 1d4 plus 2, and that's how many baddies the fireball will encompass. Next, narrate and re-narrate positioning and situations as needed. Certainly at the beginning of combat, you need to give everyone a solid, rough sketch. You're here, the baddies are here, this is what's around you and what's between your group and the baddie group. Then as people move around and things change, I narrate the scene again, especially at the top of each combat round. Also, be prepared to narrate for individual players when it becomes necessary. If I say, Corvarax, it's your turn, and Corvarax launches into his plan for what he's going to do, I don't need to worry about it, Corvarax is on top of it. But if Corvarax says, that's a good place to interject and say, okay, so you're standing next to Dorvril the Barbarian. Your party's rogue and sorcerer are behind you. There are trees all around, including downed logs you could use for cover. There's an ambling creek between you and the 3 bugbear guards on the other side, but you could easily reach them with your movement. Do you have any questions? This leads me to 4, keeping track of stuff. When you're running gridded, you know where things are because you can see them. You can drop those little round condition markers on the minis to know who's poisoned, who's concentrating, who's charmed, etc. In Theater of the Mind, you don't have this luxury, so you have to get good at either remembering who's got what or keeping good real-time notes. This can be a bit overwhelming at first, but I promise you will get used to it. Draw out positions on a piece of paper or a whiteboard that only you see if it helps. If you're using a digital combat and counter tracker like D&D Beyond's, you can probably note conditions and those sorts of things there. Also, don't forget point number 2 about ignoring distances, so it's fine to approximate. Let go of that innate desire to get out a ruler. This isn't Warhammer. And if need be, you can quickly sketch out something for the players on a physical notepad or a digital note-sharing app so they can get a better sense of the geography. But I would caution you not to become dependent on this because then you're sketching out maps for every combat, which kind of defeats the purpose of Theater of the Mind. I would only sketch out things if you're in a tricky situation geographically or it's really necessary. So there you go, the good, bad, and ugly of running Theater of the Mind and why you should consider it. At least for those sudden, unexpected combats where you don't want to waste time getting out all your gear. It really can be a lifesaver. Anyway, thanks for watching. I sure would love a like and subscribe below if you can spare the click. This is GM Jim, now go out there and swing some swords and drop some fireballs.